you along those lines. All right, we're very fortunate to have with us today Adam Werbach as our speaker. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Saatchi & Saatchi, based in New York. He's based here in San Francisco. This is a worldwide communications networking company, and he'll be talking a little bit about that today. Adam lists his occupation on Wikipedia as environmental activist, and he certainly is. He was elected the youngest ever president of the Sierra Club when he was 23 years old. And he'll, I think, be talking with us a little bit about those experiences as well. Those are also cataloged in a book that he wrote some years ago called Act Now, Apologize Later, which is no new strategy for those of us in the university environment. His most recent book, A Strategy for Sustainability, a Business Manifesto, published by Harvard Business Press, is receiving widespread acclaim, and he'll be talking about some of the things in that book today. So without further ado, let me introduce Adam Werbach, whose title today is The Fifth Sense, Innovation Powered by Purpose. Adam?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be with you today and to share some ideas that are actually not in my last book, but are looking forward in terms of what we need right now. I am, by some strange turn or twist of fate, I'm a business strategist. I spend most of my time working with big companies, helping them to figure out how to move into the next century, how to move to the next generation, how to figure out how to survive and to actually be sustainable. In a business context, sustainability means one thing: long-term profitability. And I used to bristle at that definition as I was weaned and yelped by David Brower, who lived in the hills of Berkeley and was my mentor. He was the first executive director of the Sierra Club. And I don't think he could imagine what I'm doing right now. But that word sustainability is very consistent with a broader definition of sustainability that you or I might hold. In simple terms, sustainability, which is allowing our ecosystem to live and thrive for generations to come, or in the definition of the Brundtland Report, is to ensure that, that there's enough for generations to come. But what I want to talk about right now is kind of a greater need that businesses need to respond to, and how innovation powered by purpose might actually be the solve. A quick outline. I want to talk about this moment of rapid change that we're in. I want to suggest that we're not moving fast enough, or not at the speed of the change we need to, particularly in the corporate realm. I want to do a quick opportunity map and challenge map looking at the state of the world. Then I want to quickly look at the state of innovation in response to that. And finally, I want to share some of this information around the fifth sense innovation model, which was created in 1907 and 1908 by Kikune Ikeda in Japan. And then finally look at some cases of how this model is actually being brought to life across the world. Let's show where innovation has taken us right now. This is the Titan Shave Mate, the 6-blade razor. If someone can explain to me why 6 blades is better than 5, I would be impressed. But innovation right now counts a lot for these sorts of micro-additive, silly, dumb uses of resources. No one really needs a 6-blade razor, and it's kind of a waste of innovation as far as I'm concerned. This morning I tweeted out on Twitter, tell me some dumb uses of innovation, and this one came up. Any razor more than 1 blade. I'm embarrassed to say that I use one. I won't anymore. Here is a garlic something that Williams-Sonoma just launched, but I never really had a problem with garlic. But maybe I do and need this contraption to cut it. Lunchables. This was sent by a number of tweeters to me. This is a way of making a very simple lunch for your child, mostly packaging, not much nutrition. This is what stands in for innovation, unfortunately, very incremental when it reaches to the consumer realm. Clay Shirky's recent book, Cognitive Surplus, talks about the fact that since the 1940s, we've had so much more time because of advances in technology that we've begun to have this extra brain power to spend. We finally have a place to spend it, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media. And a lot of it gets used for things like LOL cats, which is cute. But it's obviously also going somewhere else. Wikipedia is an extraordinary resource, which has been lauded in other places. But Wikipedia very clearly has led to WikiLeaks, which, only a few weeks ago released cables from the United States government that, and one thing, explained how the now former Tunisian President Ben Ali's son had a pet tiger, and this pet tiger was fed 4 chickens a day. The Tunisian people read these cables, were not particularly thrilled. It was the sparking point that helped to foment a revolution. And in a very direct way, the Tunisian revolution has led to the Egyptian revolution. And if you're like me and just glued to the media right now, watching what's happening in Tahrir Square, when I say the world is changing very quickly, you know what I mean. The world is changing so quickly right now that the systems we have of innovation, of corporate management, of planning are nowhere near prepared to respond to those changes. And the challenge I'll set for us today is how to set a social goal that will allow that corporation to align with this changing face of the world. There were about 14,000 Twitter users in Egypt, Yemen, or Tunisia just about a month ago. Their tweets have gone up tenfold during this period. So what I want to suggest is that innovation, as suggested not only by things like Wikipedia, WikiLeaks, but also Lunchables and those razors, is not moving fast enough to respond to the type of crises we face on the planet. We'll start really something kind of close to home in my perspective. This is a picture of Siberia, and the red dots you see are fires. Last summer, the average Moscow July temperature was 14 degrees Fahrenheit above the norm. And as a result of the heat wave in Russia, world wheat prices went up about 60% in 2 months. 60% in 2 months. Still, 1.5 billion people still have no access to electricity. 2.5 billion people rely on traditional biomass for heating, like these 2 boys right here, including wood, agricultural residue, and dung for cooking and heating. And today, there are more people dying from smoke, from biomass for cooking, than from malaria or TB. This is a picture of the Li River in China. There was an extraordinary drought there last summer. The Li River looked like that later in the summer. Rainfall was 60% below normal in some regions. 17 million people were short of drinking water, with villagers lining up for emergency drinking water from the government. This friendly person is a beekeeper in Golden Gate Park. Most of the honey we eat in the United States comes from China. And we've long known that honey actually has healthful characteristics. For example, there's some new research that shows that if you eat your local honey where you go, you'll be protected from allergens in the area because you're getting a massive dose of the pollen that all those bees are taking in. It's a good metaphor, the type of localization that I think we're going to see, the cultural importance of local. That's going to be a massive trend heading into the 21st century. This is a photo I took in Mumbai this year. The level of challenge for these massive new cities to deal with central services like garbage collection and water is another challenge. In this coal tanker in the waters right off Mumbai, right now the estimates are that world coal consumption will increase by 56% by the year 2035. So we see a massive change, a massive pull on our resources. So looking at that opportunity map, looking at that challenge, how do we find a new methodology to accelerate innovation for good, to solve those sorts of challenges, to put more eyes and ears and hands and budgets onto those sorts of challenges in a way, by my definition, that builds sustainability in this larger sense, that works with some of the largest institutions in the world to increase their longevity, their profitability, and their future by seizing on these efforts. The first argument I'll try to make to businesses is that societal change right now faces and favors the innovator. The companies that are growing, on your left you'll see the business growth axis, are companies that are set to profit from societal change, who understand this is coming and are prepared for that. And the companies who are the incumbents, the ones who actually have market share, who have existed in their realm for years, are the ones who are least interested in that sort of change. You can imagine Mubarak's cronies right now, who are and have been leading construction companies, IT firms, and others, and they're very nervous right now at all the societal change they're seeing. This has been quite clear with some companies through the Napster moment. I remember 5 years ago, a friend of mine was appointed the president of a major record label, and he hired me to help them become more sustainable. And to his horror, the company only wanted to do one thing to become more sustainable. They wanted to make their CD cases out of bamboo. I said, well, yeah, maybe you should go digital. That would seem to be the right choice. But they couldn't see that type of societal change that was happening. Newspapers weren't able to see Craigslist, and camera makers weren't able to see Nokia as a competitor. My son today, or actually yesterday, I was taking a picture with an old film camera, and he asked me for the phone. He said, "Can I see your phone, Dad?" Because that's what he thought it was. And then he couldn't understand why he couldn't see on the back of it, he couldn't see the image. He'll never know what a film camera is. If you're in a corporate R&D department, if you're at a board, this is kind of a list of things that you'll look at and say, these are reasons why I should be embracing change, searching for change. Regulation, consolidation, resource price fluctuations. For example, right now we see oil floating around $100 a barrel, but we could it's not an unlikely scenario now that we'll see oil at 125 barrels, $125 barrel, $150 barrel. I mean, you can imagine if the Suez Canal closes down, which again is not out of the realm of impossibility at this point, although not what we expect, you could see $200 oil. And what would $200 a barrel oil do to the supply chains of most large companies? So these are the calls for change, and it's not a very hard list in the sense that most companies I talk to or share this with say, okay, yeah, I can recognize that some of these things are happening to me, and I have to respond. I want to take a quick break and just talk about what we mean by innovation, because I think this quote by John Seeley Brown does it the best. I'm not talking about invention here. I'm really talking about commercializable innovation. I'm really, as you hear, very focused on a corporate sense. Largely because I spent most of my career in the nonprofit and legislative and political world. And I see us underinvesting in how we can change these major large corporations in terms of how they promote social good through their own business models. But Seeley Brown laid out the difference between innovation and invention. And of course, he had great experience at Xerox PARC, which helped invent the laser printer, the Ethernet, the personal computer, and was never able to commercialize those things. Henry Chesbrough here at Cal has been the greatest promoter of open innovation, this idea that innovation can't happen only inside the walls of the company. You need to open your ears and eyes and listen. Eric von Hippel has talked a lot about how lead users can be a key part to that innovation model. And these are key criteria that need to be in any next stage innovation model for purpose, because unless we bring outside ideas out into the corporate realm and we empower the citizen, the user, to actually get involved, there's no way it will be successful. But basically, there's kind of three areas where people look at in terms of maximizing their innovation spend, their R&D spend at companies. They'll say, how can I incentivize my people more effectively to innovate? How do I encourage them to do both incremental and disruptive innovation? How do I create an innovation process so that we know how to not just think of new inventions but turn them into innovations, things that are commercializable. They'll say, how to create an environment that's more open, that brings these ideas in. How do we make that happen? But what I want to suggest to you today is the question that we need to be asking more and more is, how do I set a sense of purpose to that innovation? How do I make it not just be a commercial question of how do I make another product, sell another unit, make another widget, make another blade on that razor, but how do I tie this into this emerging sense of societal change? What I want to suggest is that that is the greatest motivator for innovations in the 21st century, and it's one that major companies are not really using right now to full effect. And it's something that we need them to. So let's move back into the fifth sense. The story of it really begins with Aristotle in 350 BC. Of course, the father of modern logic. Aristotle was also the first person to define the major taste categories: sweet, sour, bitter, salty. And pretty much they stayed unchanged between 350 BC and the 20th century. Kikuné Ikeda was born right in the middle of the Meiji period. The Meiji period was an extraordinary moment of modernization of Japan. In 1867, Prince Matsuhito ascended to the role of Emperor of Japan and adopted a new charter oath and kicked off this breakneck modernization. He was 15 years old at the time. He used the twin forces of democracy and industrialization to bring the country together, implementing an 11-article constitution, establishing legislative bodies, creating term limits for a corrupt system, setting up a voting system. But his greatest passion was to bring ideas from the rest of the world into Japan. Over 3,000 foreign experts were brought in to modernize Japan, including French military advisors whose exploits were later chronicled in that Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, though Tom Cruise didn't speak French in that. By the 1890s, Japan had succeeded in building a modern capitalist country, but there was considerable opposition at the time from those that imposed imperial rule still. But into this moment, Ikeda was born. He was a chemist and a professor, and he set out to figure out what made Japanese food delicious. Born in Kyoto, he was a descendant of a samurai. He studied in Germany with Nobel Prize-winning chemist Professor Ostwald, who was famous for his work on the atomic weights of elements and the manufacturing of nitric acid. But with his skills sharpened, Ikeda longed to return home and become a professor once again at Tokyo Imperial University. With high levels of malnutrition in Japan, Ikeda hoped to improve the health of the Japanese people by making them proud of their local food. The riddle that Ikeda set out to solve was that the dashi that his wife cooked for him at home each night didn't taste like the four generally accepted tastes: sweet, salty, bitter, or sour. For him, it was something altogether different, altogether umami, as the Japanese would say, which translates into delicious. Ikeda worked to refine seaweed to find the key to its taste. His tests showed that the umami was the salt of an organic acid. He used lead nitrate to produce a salt that would precipitate. Eventually, he was able to determine that what was left was glutamic acid, which was his discovery. The taste, which he named umami, was the first new generally accepted taste in over 1,500 years. He eventually commercialized this taste, founding the Ajinomoto Company, which today has more than 25,000 employees and over $10 billion in sales. Their main product, MSG. Now, I want to step back and look at the model that he used to make this invention, this innovation. He used four things: a North Star goal, a sense of micro-addition, a cultural sensibility, and a use of social networks. And I'll break those down slowly. The cultural side is hugely interesting to me because it's one that's largely ignored in the innovation sense. But for the Japanese, this was a very natural step. Japanese cooking has a very strong sense of seasonal food, or shun. Food that is at shun is at its best. Hashiri is early produce. Nagori is produce past its prime. It's common in Japanese cooking to refer to those things. This is a picture of Ikeda when he was doing the research. Here are the assumptions that we might then pull out to drive us towards that model. The first is that the world is changing, and business must change with it to survive. And all those reasons I laid out earlier are a pretty good start on it. But it seems so obvious, and yet it's so hard for large enterprises, particularly ones that are incumbents, to really grasp. Second, this assumption that culture will increasingly become important in the 21st century. And by culture, I mean a lot of different things. It could be your music. It can be your set of the food you eat. It could be how you dress. It could be the songs you sing. It could be religion. It could be your sense of nationhood. It could be your sense of community. These unique cultures are going to become more and more important to us as we become in much more of a commoditized society. The third assumption is that nano-practices would lead to radical change. As we understand behavioralism more and more, we understand that we can't really change someone. If I tried to convince you to vote Democratic and you were Republican, the chance of me doing that through a conversation or a set of conversations are virtually zero. But if I try to build you up and try to understand who you are and what you believe by your very basic actions, the type of shoes you wear, the type of food you buy, the type of car you drive, why you make those choices, I can begin to reach who you are and to affect your choices. So understanding things at a nano-practice level is absolutely critical. And finally, that social networking will become a dominant 21st century skill. There's a recent argument you've seen recently kicked off by Amy Chua, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. People familiar with this book? She endorses Chinese, kind of a mythology of Chinese parenting and Chinese mothering as the best. And David Brooks really recently took her on, saying that the sort of drilling model of you must learn and memorize the same thing over and over is actually not the really hard stuff. The really hard stuff is actually the social networks and how you actually build them. And the child who has to figure out what to do and how to be successful on the playground will actually be the successful child in the 21st century. I'm not sure whether he's completely right or she's completely right, but I am sure that sense of social network is going to be absolutely essential to leaders of the future. So let's look at how the fifth sense innovation responds to this. The first assumption is about societal change. More and more companies are setting what are called North Star goals. In previous sort of business theory model, there was the idea of a BHAG that Jim Collins has popularized, a big, hairy, audacious goal where GE would say, we're going to be the number one or number two in every business segment we're in. Or Walmart would say, we're going to be a $100 billion company within 3 years. But they were just purely financial goals. A North Star goal brings a financial goal, a core business goal, together with a social purpose goal. So Walmart has recently said, we're going to be powered 100% by renewable energy, we're going to produce zero waste, and we're going to sell only products that sustain the earth in our stores. It's a business goal because if they reduce waste, they save money. And it's a social goal because the world would really like if they produce less waste. That's a North Star, and it drives all sorts of good performance inside the enterprise. Cultural. That culture will become increasingly important in the 21st century is assumption number 2. The innovation needs to be based on a cultural insight. It can't be built for someone generally out there. It has to be built for a particular subculture and understand how that subculture works and how that subculture can see itself in the innovation. Third, the assumption is nano-practices will lead to radical changes. The innovation needs to be micro additive. It needs to start from a very small piece and build on something else. It's very rare that the type of innovation we'll see in this framework is going to come out of the blue from someone on a chalkboard just thinking of a great idea. That may still happen, but not in this framework. And finally, social networking will become a dominant 21st century skill. The innovation in this fifth sense will really be powered by social networks. We'll see that the social networks themselves both participate in the invention as well as the commercialization of new ideas. So let's look at how that works across the Ikeda umami innovation. The North Star was to lower the rate of childhood malnutrition. The micro addition is building up from the smallest component, the sense of taste. If I can figure out what makes someone like and be proud of their local food, I can build from there, which is also the cultural insight that pride in umami food would be good for Japan and would help popularize Japanese food. And finally, the social networks. The chemistry networks he established in Germany helped him commercialize his discovery and get it out. Before that time, Japanese discoveries were kind of looked askance because of language barriers and because of lack of those sort of strong networks to stronger scientific centers, more strongly perceived scientific centers. So our question is, and this is at CATA in the later years, is how can that lead to other types of innovations? And what other type of innovations are we seeing through this older model begin to come to light? And I'll just run through a few. Ratan Tata, who is the chairman of the Tata organization, which is one of the largest industrial conglomerates in India. You can't really see that picture very well. Was driving home one day and saw 4 Indians on a two-wheeler commuting home. And he was struck by it and thought that everyone should have a car. That insight eventually led to the Nano, which has been somewhat of a failure, frankly. It's a one-lock car, so it's a little less than $5,000, and it was decried as horrible by environmentalists immediately. But it's a pretty interesting aspirational tool. You know, there are over 1 billion people in India, and they need to get places, and they will need to have cars. So it was a pretty amazing innovation to come up with some of the technology they needed to make this thing happen and to put it together. But probably more importantly than that is what it also set out to do in the rest of the company. The Tata company is owned over 60% by family trusts, and all the profits go right back into development projects in the country. So it's mostly run by a charity. One innovation that came out of it was the Tata Swatch, which is a new water filter that can be made at very low cost. 30% of rural Indians have access to safe drinking water, only 30%. And 55% rely on tube well or hand pumps for drinking water. The Swatch was designed to fulfill his vision of making safe drinking water available to all at an affordable cost. Swatch means clean in Hindi, and it was a part of a strategic effort of theirs to target low-income Indian consumers with the high-value, low-cost solutions. It's made of low-cost natural ingredients like rice husk and ash, and uses nanotech to deliver safe drinking water at a price of about 30 rupees per month for a family of 5, far below the cost of bottled water. It works without clean water or electricity, both of which are rarely available in rural India. Again, the North Star, basic comforts for all Indians. It was started with this the concept around the Tata Nano, but now moved across into the Swatch. Microadditive, using waste materials to lower cost, cultural insight, Swadeshi or local self-sufficiency solutions will be small scale and local, and pushed through social networks. The only way you can sell something like this is through these rural partnerships with rural salespeople. In this rural town in India, where you see those bags of chips hanging is a little store, and EKO, which is a new mobile text banking firm, started up with a very simple idea of making banking available for all. This is the team, and the man to the left here is Abhishek, who's the CEO. This company basically allows people to go into their local Tienda Mini Mart store, give them 1,000 rupees, maybe the equivalent of $20, and have that be sent. So if they're living in Bihar or Andhra Pradesh, they can send it to their friends or family in the city and send money back and forth. It's partnered with the State Bank of India, and it's a very simple technology. They use pictograms to educate people who can't read how to use them. And they use old signal books. As you can see, these are the codes they use to give people, so that you basically choose the code number and then you just add your 4-digit personal number into it as a way of sending money from you to somebody else. They're doing about $2 million a day in transactions and growing about 20% a week at this point. Massively growing and driven by this very simple vision that Indians need access to banking at non-usurious prices. through North Star Banking for All, microadditive using cell phones to bank, and text. They really don't use smartphones for this. Cell phones are about 96% penetration in India, in a place where about 35% and rural people have access to water. The cultural insight was that local stores hold community trust. So instead of building a state bank of India in every village, they're using their local stores. And the social networks is there's thousands of local nodes. This is a farmer whose packaging is cauliflower. The challenge that, and roughly 80% of small farms in India are less than 5 hectares. So they're very small marginal farms. And this is a cauliflower crop that he's bringing in. You'll see how kind of terribly it's packaged. About 25% of the product of the cauliflower is ruined in transport. There's far too many pesticides, far too much fertilizers used on it just because of lack of education. And he's barely a subsistence farmer. He's barely making ends meet. Average salary less than $2 a day. This is the trader who sends his truck out. Actually, it's his father's truck. Brings the farmers in, and then they have the right to sell to him at the price that he says. You can literally see him put his finger on the scale. You can't totally see it, but that thing around his neck is a bag full of money, of their money, and he takes between 5 and 15% off the top of every sale. When there's rural co-ops set up in India, for example, for milk, the farmer will take about 80 cents of the dollar, 80 rupees out of 100, and put it in his pocket. When it's set up like this, through these sorts of syndicates, for example, tomatoes, the farmer will see about 25 cents on the dollar. So one retailer that's coming in is trying to change this by educating and pulling together local cooperatives of farmers. One farmer I met with, you can see his challenges. This is a blight that he saw on his crop. He's been putting too many pesticides on it. But he's also been, you can sort of see, this is actually an aubergine, an eggplant crop here with an agronomist. And he's not even picking it because it's basically in such terrible shape, the blight, and the price he's getting is not worth it, so he's just leaving it to rot on the vine. But the idea that this retailer is trying to do is trying to move around the syndicates to actually put lower priced food into their shelves. So this will lower the price that they pay, increase the amount of profit in the farmer's pocket, and disintermediate lots of people in the middle who are not bringing a lot of value to the process, but are certainly helping that person starve. And they're very simple technologies. This is still, again, a very small farm, but this is drip irrigation. This is tomatoes about to be planted, and they're about to be staked. But essentially, by just doing drip irrigation, staking, and a great reduction in the amount of pesticide and fertilizer use, they can greatly increase output and quality and lower price. So the North Star, lower the cost of food, increase the profit of the farmer. Micro addition, simple low-tech farming techniques. Cultural insight, the small farmer is key. And building farmer cooperative groups, the technology. I'll give a couple more, then we'll end. This is a wind turbine. Vestas is the world's largest producer of wind turbines, kind of the inventor of the modern technology. It used to be into make large, giant dough mixers in Denmark, and somehow use that same technology to create wind turbines 100 years later. An inventor inspired by their power to make, their desire and the North Star goal to make wind the dominant source of power, looked at one particular challenge they were having, which was that this is inside a wind turbine, which is that the welds on the ladders made them have to make the thickness of the tower much thicker, and because every time they would weld, it would threaten the structural integrity of the tower. Came with a very simple idea of putting magnets there instead of welds, and pretty much every of the large towers, all the ladders to go up the towers now are using that technology. It's very simple. Again, North Star, power the world by wind. The addition is tiny magnets. Cultural insight, constant improvement, and the social networks is a global innovation partnership that helped to come up with this, which I can go into more detail if anyone's interested. Closer to home, we're seeing a couple other things that are just interesting. This is my local CVS in the Mission District. in San Francisco, and it's a good example of a food desert. This is not exactly delicious food. And Walmart recently has announced a major food initiative to lower the cost of fruits and vegetables and make them more available to people across the country. Again, the North Star, lower the cost of healthy food. The micro addition is building on existing sustainability efforts. The cultural insight is very simple. You lower costs and you make more fruits. You put more fruit and veggies in tummies. And the social networks is they're using mom networks. And if you've seen the announcement, they used Michelle Obama as the lead advocate of this idea of healthier eating, lowering trans fat, and lowering salt in products. So this is the model. And what I guess I want to show is that this is happening more and more. We see it a lot right now in startups in Asia, largely because they don't have the burden of incumbency. But we're starting to see signs of it too here in the US. The Walmart was one mention. This is Best Buy's new future-proof program. It's moving towards leasing technology where you can actually buy a little insurance policy and get 50% of the cost to your next item 2 years later when the new technology comes out. Sungevity, an Oakland business, is doing rural solar leases. So basically you can put solar on your roof for nothing right now. And Amazon is just now testing in Seattle the tote bag strategy, which is instead of sending you a new box every time, a tote that you fill up every week and gets delivered to you the same day. I'll end with one story of positive deviance because I think that's actually the model, probably the most useful thing that could come out of a conversation of fifth sense innovation. This was back in 1990 in Vietnam. Save the Children sent a young advocate to figure out how to deal with the malnutrition level in Vietnam. At the time, 2/3 of the children under 5 were malnourished. And this advocate, Jerry Sternin, went to pick 4 villages, and he weighed 2,000 kids to figure out basically who was malnourished, and found most of them were. He went to the same town once he had this baseline and said, are there any families that are actually really healthy, that are really doing well, even though they're also very poor? And they found some. And they were doing a few things. Some of them were adding greens to their diet from the sweet potato. When they picked it, they just kept the greens. Some added these small shrimp and crabs from the patties that they also found there. They all washed their hands before and after the meals. And then many ate 4 meals instead of 2. So a lot of smaller meals instead of 2 big ones. And by taking those practices and putting them into play across those small villages and across Vietnam, it helped radically change that malnutrition picture in the country. I think similarly we need to look at this type of purpose innovation, see where it's existing inside of all institutions, not just the corporate realm, and begin to push it and promote it more and more. To my argument, the only way that we're going to be able to respond or prepare for the type of massive change that's happening right now, and right now we're sitting down and people are being pelted with stones in Tahrir Square as thugs, policemen of the Mubarak regime are trying to tear out the peaceful protesters for it. I mean, the world is changing right now beyond anything that we've prepared for. And what I'll suggest to you is the only way we're going to be able to respond, the only way we're going to be prepared for that, is by having a framework of innovation and invention that is ready to change and be flexible along with it, which will have to say, how do we solve the underlying issues? How do we innovate around those issues instead of building a better Lunchable, a better spork, or a better 6-bladed razor? Thank you. So I've left some time for questions. I hope there's some.
Lori or Yvette has the microphone in the back, and I've got one up front. Please raise your hand so you can use a microphone to ask Adam a question.
I wanted to bring up the issue of you're emphasizing nano practices as opposed to large-scale event changes comparable to, Henry Ford or Tesla or the big changes of technological paradigms. The overall structure is one of convergence essentially the industrial revolution now going to cover the entire world. And so there's a lot of complexity where it goes into the poorer regions of the world. But I don't think that this convergence of several times larger economy is going to occur without very large changes comparable to what we saw around 1900 in this country.
Yeah, I largely agree with you. I think that there are going to be enormous changes that we're going to see. I just think they're going to be built from very, very small building blocks. You know, some of the assumptions we made, of course, were that resources were limitless, that kind of everyone was the same in the end. So the factory that we'd build in one country was much like the factory we build in another country. I think and the product we'd put out in that country was much like the product we put out in this country. I think more and more that specialization, localization, and resource shrinking, particularly in terms of energy and water, I think are going to help drive that change. But I think you're right. The changes are going to be of that scale.
Was there a question here?
So how do you keep companies from I get this program, but it's very similar to greenwashing. Like you have this happy goal, and then you really make a profit from it, and it doesn't have much to do with, something green. Like in these cases, it definitely does, but it seems like greenwashing is almost identical. So how do you keep companies from doing that, and how do consumers know the difference when they're uninformed and usually stupid?
Well, I don't think consumers are stupid. I think that they figure it out. I kind of believe that the era of greenwashing is over, largely because they're smart now. They've figured out that if you put a leaf on something, it doesn't mean better. It just means it costs more. No, actually, I mean, we've seen we kind of watch the people's desire to buy something that's green, and it's gone way, way down. Particularly, and also things like way, way local, largely in the context of the recession. They're just not as interested in doing that. They are looking for things that are going to save them money, have it work better, last longer, not make them sick, be healthy for their kid. So they're looking for very simple values that aren't green, they're just good, if that makes sense. Now, the question, of course, you asked was, how do you make sure you don't do greenwashing? And the answer is, you really don't market this stuff. You don't market, look at how good we are, you market a great product. That's just better. Now, it may have come out of this innovation process that pulled upon the people inside the organization and said, what's your purpose? What's your passion? How do we get you out of bed? How do we make you come and change our company? We're a company that's perceived as bad. We need you to make us good. How do we do that? And then you market that. You don't market that we're going to do something. You market what we've done, and here it is. As far as I'm concerned, again, I run a sustainability agency, and I've never run a green campaign. I just think it's dumb marketing because no one buys it. So I've done a lot of work with Walmart, and they're not green.
Yeah, I noticed.
Well, but I think they wouldn't make that claim either. What they have said is that they've taken steps and done things like that. And I think that you could look back now. I mean, 5 years ago when I started doing work with them, it was sort of radical. They didn't think about it. Now you can look at all the people down the supply chain, and you've seen that they've kicked off a lot of changes. Is it enough? No way. It's not even close to enough. And the biggest challenge is that what ends up happening is things are slightly better. We're going to make a 6-bladed razor in less plastic. It's like, well, great. That doesn't really solve one of the core challenges we have. And I think that's the question, the thing I'm wrestling with is how do you make them move a lot faster and further so it's not a lot of talk, it's a lot of actual change.
So you probably know what this is.
I'm not sure. I can see it from
Have
here.
you seen it? Show it up. That is an ink cartridge. There's no ink inside it. That whole thing disappears after it's done being used for the new laser printers. That's probably something that will have a big impact. They show the equivalence of a whole bunch of cartridges, and they see one of these. So when you're doing sustainability, this is the kind of thinking that we need. In fact, you see, these are great. They're coming out from Xerox.
I love it.
They're going to revolutionize the way we do printing.
That's great. That's great.
So a question for me, Adam. One thing we don't seem to have to design are the social networks. I mean, we need to give them a nudge, but they've just sort of exploded. How do we, in the academic community, integrate what's going on with social networks into our formal education? How can we leverage that and take advantage of that, particularly as we reach down into K through 12, to prepare them for this kind of change that's going to happen?
Well, I think CITRIS is a great example of that type of networking and this cross-campus collaboration that actually begins to make it happen. I think that the biggest thing in my experience is basically just, first of all, don't shut it down, right? I mean, like, don't block it, which is a very common response to social networks. In companies, people try to shut them down, or they try to set their own contained cage. And one thing that we do when we analyze a company is say, like, how much of your email goes inside the company compared to email going out of the company? And if it's not some good ratio where a lot is going out, then you're way too closed. You've got to open yourself up. And I think at an academic sense, it's probably asking the same question. How much are we just talking to ourselves, and how much are we talking to the community around us? How much are we solving problems that may have an application, or if not, basic science that can actually, we can share some of that basic science with the people around us to benefit that society as well.
Great, thank you. Got a question over here?
Do you think that there's a substantial role for government in promoting the growth and like the mainstreaming of these kind of innovation networks?
There is a major role for government. I think what I see, particularly in context of Obama's Innovation Now speech, is massive new funding for basic science and research. Right now, top funding for academic institutions. Great funding in terms of loan guarantees for scaling technologies once they actually are commercializable. And those are three areas that I'd like to see a model for roughly $30 to $50 billion a year of additional incremental spending put into those areas. That's the best thing that the government can do. And then that all gets magnified by government purchasing when the government's actually out there saying this is what we want. So, for example, when Xerox was able to convince the government to change its guidelines to buy products that are remanufactured, that changed the face of remanufacturing. A typical Xerox product now is 70 or 80% recycled parts, not just recycled, reused parts from your old Xerox printer. You have a Xerox printer, it comes from an old one in a commercial sense. And that was kind of faltering for a while until they were able to change government standards and said, we will not take anything that's used. We'll only take things that are new. That's kind of silly, right? Just get something that's remanufactured. It's just as good, maybe better.
Adam, thank you for such a well-prepared and well-delivered talk. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.